Hello, everybody listening or reading or watching. This is Lacey Van Landingham, and I met her in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, where we were both lobbying with March 4th, a nonpartisan organization that is working to advocate for gun safety. And she has a personal story that I wanted her to share a little bit about, like how she got involved. So, Lacey, welcome to my Substack, and please just share anything you want right now about who you are and why. Like, what are the events that led to you finding March 4th or being an advocate now for gun safety and gun reform?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Chrissy. So I found March 4th like a few years ago. I have a friend that lives in Chicago and she would post some of Kitty's messages, and it was always something that was really inspiring. But I think, like many other people that I know, it's these tragedies happen in such like a bubble that's in the universe that like we don't exist in. Like it's always happening in communities that are far away, so you don't ever know anybody that's super personal. I think for me, it's like I see Uvalde and I've seen Sandy Hook, and I've kind of like grown up in this time where school shootings and just shootings in general have become more rampant. But it wasn't really until I myself went through a mass shooting that I kind of like was stopped in my tracks a little bit, and that like, no, this can happen to anyone, anywhere, no matter who you are or where you live. And so I am a survivor of a mass shooting that happened in Allen, Texas. In May 2023, I was at an outlet mall doing a quick return by myself. And as I like jumped into a quick store to see if they had something I needed, and was about to walk out of the store, gunshots started going out off. So I ran back into the fitting room and kind of waited as I heard the shots getting closer and then ultimately farther away until they stopped completely. And then in that moment, just kind of, you know, didn't know what to do. I think you kind of just like freeze. And I went through it all, and then we are eventually evacuated by the police. And I think, going through that event is traumatizing in itself. But I think the evacuation was also traumatizing because not only were, and this is something I didn't know until you go through it, is mass shooting survivors actually get evacuated at gunpoint because people don't know what the threat are. And so we actually had to walk out with our hands raised as SWAT team members evacuated us, and we were evacuated along the path that the shooter actually took. And so I saw a lot of the carnage and then aftermath of that, which I didn't realize at the time how much of an impact that would have. And so
Mhm.
I luckily walked away from it, but I was definitely not the same. And for a very long time, I didn't understand why. I couldn't just get over it. And so after therapy and lots of months in time, I ended up taking some time off of work to deal with it. Um, Started seeing a psychiatrist, and started doing EMDR. And eventually I was diagnosed with PTSD, which was such a very surreal thing of getting diagnosed with something that you only really see about in like movies and like veterans of war. And it's like I was just at a mall, and now I kind of suffer the effects of that. And so it's been a journey. And then I got involved with March 4th pretty soon after that because I just was so tired of seeing these things continue to happen. I think it was after the Kansas City shooting where it was like the Super Bowl parade where people were injured because of gunfire. I got really mad.
Yeah.
And I filled out a form, and March 4th invited me to come to DC with them in March to share my story. And ever since then, it's like, okay, this is at least an outlet for me to kind of not necessarily let my story be for nothing, like bring some sort of action to it, but also just bring a voice to my community. It's not the easiest topic in the state of Texas. And so it's been really empowering to at least have that voice for a community that was pretty significantly impacted by gun violence.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, how did the experience of being a victim of a mass shooting and being a survivor now shape your perspective on the gun laws and now your advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually funny that you use those terms because it took me a very long time to even be able to say I was a survivor because I was like, I was just in a store. And so I have gotten to the point now where like, yes, I did survive this. And I think for the gun law specifically, I think, it kind of just woke me up that it's not that like, oh, these tragedies are so sad. It's going to continue to happen and more people are going to get impacted by this. And I think that people just don't completely understand. And I was one of them that, yes, there are physical effects that happen to this if you are an actual victim that was shot, but the mental toll that this is taking for everyone that has been in a building where this happens. And it just, that for me is like, I just don't know why it's not enough. Um,
Yeah.
to just do something. And for me, I'm lucky to where like I don't have to go back to the mall. I have not been back. I do not have plans to go back. But there are kids that have to go back to school the next day or a week later to the place where they were traumatized. And so I think it's just like, why aren't we doing more to protect our children? And not just putting excuses in place of like, oh, well, we should have we should lock the doors more and we should make them practice these active shooter drills. Like, no, like that's not the cause of mass shootings. The cause of mass shootings are the guns that are
Yeah.
causing the mass shooting.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, how do you respond to people that say, no, it's a mental health issue? Because I work in mental health and I'm like, clearly it's an epidemic of mental health, but it is also an epidemic of gun violence. And so, what can we do faster, in my opinion, as a therapist, is take away the weapon that is causing this and then reach these oftentimes young people that are doing this damage. And so I'm curious how you respond to that because that's, to me, it's infuriating. I can only imagine how infuriating that is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how Kitty, our founder, puts it is like yes and like that we know that there are multiple solutions to this epidemic. Like one thing is not going to blanket remove everything. And so, like, yes, we have a mental health crisis that needs to be solved. And we have a gun problem that no other country has. Every other country has mental health issues, but they're not having mass shootings happen. And so it has to be an and statement. I think the other part that I like to respond with that is like, yeah, it is a mental health crisis. My mental health has suffered tremendously
Uh,
because I was a victim of a mass shooting. And so it's like, yes,
yeah.
we obviously need to address the mental health that's causing people to feel
Yeah.
like they have to take these crazy actions, but also like we need to be able to support people who have gone through these tragedies because like it's people just aren't the same afterwards. Like I think the police chief in Madison, Wisconsin said it really, really well after the unfortunate mass shooting that happened at that school just 2 days ago, which is every single child is now a victim because that they were in that building that day. And I think that is a really powerful statement to understand like
Uh,
kind of the gravity of it.
yeah. And I oftentimes fear that as a country, we're being desensitized to how barbaric and how horrific it is that children now have to think about this and do drills and be the one to call 911 when there's an active shooter. And we even talked in Washington, D.C. a lot about how the lockdown drills are traumatizing children. Um, and that the fact that they are needed that should wake us up and alone that they are practicing for something that is so horrific in our mind if we were to imagine it fully and go there. Um, and these little kids that aren't adults, that shouldn't have to think about these things, are having to be traumatized, even if there's not a school shooting. And then if there is, and you are a victim like you, and you survived it, you are still very much a victim. Your body went through something that no body should go through and remembers that feeling of being that unsafe. And
Yeah.
it's, yeah, and I'm just curious as we like sort of end this conversation, like, what was the most challenging part of healing for you, and how did you turn that or find the strength to turn the pain into action?
Yeah, I think I had a really hard time with acceptance of it for a long time. Like I remember through a lot of my therapy sessions, like my therapist had to ban the word normal because like I was just like, I want to go back to normal. Like I just want to be myself again. And I had a really hard time accepting the fact that there was no going back. Like I was not going to be who I was before the shooting happened. It was a matter of figuring out, okay, who am I going to be going forward? Um, and that was really hard. Because like I think most people, it's like we just want to just forget about it. Like I thought if I could just power through it, I could go back to work, go back to the life with my kids, just like act like nothing happens. But then it's like, I can't, like fireworks go off, like I need to wear noise canceling headphones. Like if there's certain movies that have guns in it, like I can't watch those anymore. Like there's so many triggers on a daily life that aren't even necessarily like these huge things like a gun is going off. It is, but they're reminders that bring me back. And
Mhm.
that's always going to happen. Like it may get better with time, but it's always going to be something that I have to consider.
Yeah.
And it took me a very, very long time to be okay with that and understand like I have boundaries now and I have limits and I need to be aware of what they are and not afraid to like put them in place. And while sometimes they're really frustrating because I know I have to like build in extra time to like recover,
Yeah.
um, it's what I need now. And so that's been probably the biggest thing that I've had to kind of learn and address.
That's, I'm just in awe of the strength that you have and the work that you've done um, to overcome this and become this new person. Um, and what is something that you would like other people to do or to know um, through your advocacy now and what we're trying to do to make change in action?
Yeah, I think, the biggest takeaway is, you know, I am one of many, many people have gone through this. And like, I always just really encourage people like, nobody should have to live through that. I get that all the time. It's like, oh, I can't imagine what you went through. And I'm like, I don't want people to have to imagine it. And so I want us to make change as a country. And it's not a political issue, which I think so many people make it out to be, but it really isn't. We want to be able to live in a world where we don't have to be fearful about going to school or sending our kids to school, going shopping or going to the movies, that we can just live our lives free without the fear of potentially getting shot.
Mm.
Um, Seems like it should be manageable, but that's my big thing. It's just like, I don't want this to keep happening. I don't want the trauma to keep happening and just our community is disrupted by it. So if we can just make our voices heard and continuing to amplify these stories. Like there are so many tragedies out there that I have heard since then, which is like one of the best things I've gotten out of my advocacy is the community of
Yeah.
other people who have gone through that, which is heartbreaking of like just seeing how many people have gone through it. And if we can stop this from being a reality for the future, like then I'm all in on that. And I hope other people will join us.
Yes, please join us. I'm going to put some links in this email and information on what you actually can do, which we're encouraging everybody to call their representatives and their congressmen and women to pass the Go Safe Act and to reinstate the federal assault weapons ban. So that is what we are asking for you guys to do. And I'm just curious if you have a way of doing that. Lacey, do you call your representative? I've seen some other accounts say like, let's pick a day and every Wednesday we call our representatives 3 times a day. And I'm gonna start that. That's gonna be a part of my weekly routine where I call every Wednesday 3 times a day.
Yeah, I have my calendar blocked off on Monday mornings to do it, but call your two senators,
Yeah.
call your representative. March 4th has call scripts to make it really, really easy for you guys. So it's not scary with all of the numbers linked to whoever your representative is. And just like, no, like this is what their jobs are. Their job is to listen to the constituents' voices, and they take note of everyone who calls and what the topic is so that they can understand like, oh, this is something that people are calling about, like let's pay attention to it. So this is how our country was built and founded, is people coming together on to make change. So definitely call pick a day, do it every day, do it once a week, however you want to do it. But yeah, make your calls. They do impact things.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your story.